Hello, everyone, and welcome to day 59 of 75 Days of Partition. Today, we are going to continue with our timeline, our newspaper timeline, to learn what was being printed at that time, what news was being published, and how that relates to what we know from oral history. So today, I've got Debanjan here with me, and he has been a social media researcher with our team for quite a while, and he has put together a really fascinating timeline of published articles. And over the next 30 minutes, we'll be discussing those with you. So welcome, Debanjan.
Hello, Bonita. It's really nice to be back again. And I hope that I'll be able to shed some light on what happened between the period 25th of July to 31st of July 1947.
Exactly. So 75 years ago this week, what happened? So fantastic. Well, if you had to, well, instead of summarizing, let's just dive right into the newspapers. I think, Anshul, maybe if you can put up the newspapers for us. There we go. Yeah. Okay. So take it away, Debanjan.
Yeah, so we'll begin with 25th July 1947. As you can read from the large headline, no violence to be tolerated in India or Pakistan. If you move to the sub-headline, two governments in united in determination, all citizens to be regarded as equal and pledged to accept Boundary Commission's award. So, as we know, this is a period when, because of a lot of uncertainty of what the how the borders were to be constructed, and because of the communal rights, there was a lot of violence that was going on against the backdrop of all the negotiations that was taking place as the British were about to exit India, share of power, resources, etc. So, within such within a bi-nation dialogue, like between the representatives of India and Pakistan, this resolution was taken up that the governments would not tolerate any violence as such, though eventually it did fail to live up to the promise, but still.
Well, what does this exactly mean? And what are they, what does it mean that they're not going to tolerate it when violence is so prevalent, as we know very well? And what are they doing exactly to curb it?
So as we know that most of the leadership of both India and Pakistan at that time were more engaged in, say, discussing the terms and conditions of, Britain's exit on one hand, then how the territories would be divided. In India's case, we have the same time the Constituent Assembly in session on, framing the constitution. So which of course was against the backdrop of all this violence happening. And at least in the Indian context, we see here of within the Constituent Assembly debates how the violence actually helped shape the constitution. But uh, as we know that a lot of the state apparatus itself was also fell victim to, the communal prejudice and etc. Like we sometimes hear of police playing a major role in fanning communal disturbances further or acting in a biased manner towards their own community and aiding the, murder or looting of the other. So yeah, again,
My point is that when we say something's not going to be tolerated, there has to be consequences, but I'm not hearing of any consequences yet. Like what are they saying are going to be the consequences if there's violence? Because violence was rampant, and obviously this article, is published because it was rampant. So what were they? Do we have any indication? I mean, obviously you won't have the answer, but I'm wondering if from the print, do we have any indication of, what they're doing to curb the violence? What repercussions there will be?
not really, because uh, again, it was. I mean, as I think leaders from both sides eventually conceded that the violence had become uncontrollable because the masses took over and the leaders had very spare control over the masses. So I don't think so that I mean, as far as I have read through the article, it
Okay.
barely speaks of anything. It's just a governmental, what,
It's sort of an
sort of,
empty, like it's a
yeah,
scolding without much, without much power.
because realistically also they couldn't control the violence in any way given the magnitude and everything. And we
Given the
don't
scale,
even
right?
see repercussions on those who acted in this. So yeah, we barely saw anything either. So
Right.
if we move to the right, election of the federal president, only elected. So here we see that again from the Constituent Assembly debates on how the Indian president would be elected. So those who might have been following the news recently also saw the president of India being elected, and the electoral college consisted of the members of both houses of the parliament, elected members, and members of the state legislative assemblies. So, and yeah, term of office fixed at 5 years, rotation system opposed. So, yeah, the president is, uh, though a mere figurehead, at least in the Indian context, uh, but still it's like they are an elected representative. And yeah, it was quite unique because even though India borrowed a lot of provisions, as I think is also I'll end up subsequently discussing in the context of another report, uh, the position of the president was unique because we don't have a monarch like that of the UK, even though most of our executive system is borrowed from the UK. So yeah, and yeah, and the middle portion is also transfer of power to Burma's government. Italy's announcement, bill in parliament in the next autumn. So again, we see like parallelly, uh, decolonization processes happening in other parts of Asia as well. So yeah, next slide,
Yeah, I
please.
think the Italian situation was a little different because it was more related to World War II occupation. So it was very short lived, not like an actual colonization. Um,
Yeah,
yeah. So
yeah.
you
So
were
again,
basically seeing the exit of the Allied powers from wherever they've occupied.
hmm, yeah, so the same case for Indonesia as well. So here we see a headline: Indonesia determined to go on fighting. So again, in the aftermath of the Japanese occupation of Indonesia, the Dutch sought to reoccupy Indonesia, which sparked the Indonesian I mean, what revolution or struggle, however way you struggle for independence, however you wish to put it. So yeah, we have been, I guess, discussing the Indonesian struggle for quite some weeks, and interestingly, this newspaper covers it every day. So even in the subsequent days, I have put in at least, I guess, I found one or two reports about Indonesia as well. And I think in my the last time I spoke, also I talked about how uh, Indonesia's struggle for independence was also supported by Indian leaders, especially by Nehru and others. So, yeah.
It's fascinating connection there.
So if we look at the smaller blurb here, Viceroy to relinquish office on August 15th. Tentative celebrations program, Mountbatten to address Constituent Assembly, Dr. Prasad to reply. So yeah, the Viceroy would, it's self-evident that on the day of independence he would relinquish office. So yeah, the right-hand side, draft instrument of accession of states. Yeah, so again, this would be an important thing that would emerge, an important issue that would emerge over the accession of princely states into the Indian Union or Pakistan, with numerous states being a bit hesitant to join either, and the entire period till I till 1948 or so saw hectic parleys between the uh, head of the princely states as well as the leaders on both sides over trying to convince them to join either through the use of force or through negotiations and all. I'll discuss it further in the next slide. Next slide, please. Yeah. This is on 26th July. So first, the bigger thing is plight of Muslims sequel to partition, loss of all rights and privileges. Uyghurs must align with progressive Hindus. Mahasabha threat ahead. So again, the making of two nations here also put forth into question issues of citizenship on questions of equality. And since it was like based on a communal division, the questions of the status of the minorities became a very important question which came to be debated uh, in both Pakistan as well as India. So here, as we see, like the Mahasabha, urging, or as the newspaper says, that threatens the Leaguers to align with the progressive Hindus. So again,
Well,
this,
what I'm seeing here is a little different. It seems to be suggesting that the Mahasabha is not threatening the Leaguers, but
it's
there is
just
a
about
Mahasabha threat, and that the Leaguers should align with the progressive Hindus in order to kind of, not in order to expand themselves, basically, to not be as much of a minority.
Yeah, so as you can see, if you can read the small blurb below, like the establishment of a separate Muslim state has created big problems for the Muslims living in the Indian Dominion. One by one, their old rights and privileges are also disappearing, says Mr. Ehtesham Mahmood Ali, MLA, in a statement to the press. So again, so for a large number of Muslims who chose to stay back, this how they will be seen. Among the leaders, there was a question of whether they would be treated as equal citizens, like whether the rights of the minorities became a very important question to be debated among different political parties as well, and for uh, bodies like the Mahasabha and, for instance, the RSS, who wanted to declare India Hindu state right at the outset. Uh, Again, the leader here expresses his fears over what might lie ahead for the Muslims who chose to stay back.
And
So, yeah,
what is the, so I have a couple of questions here. And according to the full article, what is the Mahasabha threat?
Mahasabha threat here, I think there's also a small article which I have pasted later, which I'll look at it now. But Mahasabha also, like, firstly, they refused to accept the Muslims as equals. So they, I mean, there was always a threat, openly perhaps, that the Muslims would be treated as second class citizens unless they, adhere to certain standards which the Mahasabha put forward, like if the Mahasabha had its way. So the Mahasabha wanted to declare India as a Hindu nation, right? So again, this would infringe upon the equality as citizens as well, because which would go against the Congress brand of equality and secularism. So in that way, I guess.
And who is the author of this article? And where is it published? Maybe we can remind everyone what paper this is. I know you mentioned it earlier.
So this is Amrita Bazar Patrika, which was primarily centered in Calcutta and uh, in various urban areas of UP. So, and again, this paper leans towards is a nationalist newspaper, so it leans towards the Congress, if I can put it like that.
Yeah.
So, yeah. And this article, as it seems like a interview or a quote from somebody I mean a legislator. So
Okay, so it's written by a legislator. Okay, and we don't know who it is. We don't know their
I mean a
background.
correspondent who quotes a legislator here. So
Okay, got
that
it.
way.
Got it. Okay. All
Yeah.
right. So what do we have on the right there?
So it also, I found it interesting because this paper chose to put out uh, what article on George Bernard Shaw's birthday, and it was very interesting because I read through the smaller upper portion, and it seems like George Bernard Shaw, with his very unique sense of humor, says that if you want to know more about me, my views, everything, just read my books. I found it funny for some reason. So,
Oh,
and yeah, and he also expresses his wishes that he would go on to live on even more, like he would not quit at 90 or something. But yeah, so that was a bit interesting for me.
very interesting. Thank you.
Next slide, please. Okay, so instrument of accession for Indian states. So as we know, the Indian princely states, whoever wished to join the Indian Union, had to sign an instrument of accession. Then it's like rulers not bound to accept India's constitution. Dominions to have jurisdiction over three subjects only, which would be defense, external affairs, and communication. Uh, Mountbatten invites princes to join Indian Union. So it's also documented how in the Chamber of Princes, at different points of time, Mountbatten urged the states to join the Indian Union, especially the more recalcitrant states who were, uh, wanted to be autonomous or wanted to join Pakistan while their territory lied surrounded by Indian territories. So, yeah. First and last address as Crown representative appealed to maintain old link, retention of relation to be in best interest of the states according to Mountbatten. So yeah,
Okay.
next slide.
Next slide.
Okay, so again a continuation of the Indonesian struggle, heavy fighting on all fronts in Java, Republican resistance stiffening, Dutch capture of Malang denied, Indonesians recaptured several towns and invaders suffered heavy losses. So, yeah, it's a continuation of what we have been seeing for a while now. Then, on the right hand side, we have Gandhiji disapproves of strikes in India. Maneuver for petty gains might endanger freedom. So, now against the backdrop of the violence and everything, communal violence and everything, different bodies were also organizing strikes and organizing demonstrations against the proposed partition without some were against the idea of partition itself, others were wanting a more streamlined partition, more systematic partition where the territories would be defined after proper discussions and everything. So here we see that as the law, and we should read this against the backdrop of a deteriorating law and order because as Gandhiji warns here, a maneuvering for petty gains might endanger freedom. Now, given the magnitude of violence, there was always a threat as power was being transferred from one government to other. There's always a chance that uh, a civil war might ensue or something or the other might happen which might endanger the territorial integrity or sovereignty of the newly emerging states. So yeah, next slide please. Okay, phenomenal rise in industrial disputes. So the entire colonial period was marked with rampant industrial disputes for wages, for working hours, for because like there were not many statutes or labor laws as it were which would have protected the rights and interests of the workers, and parallelly also there were an other than which were part of the freedom struggle per se in national movement but not directly linked to it. There were also a lot of workers movements arising in different parts of India, workers movements, farmers movements, the rise of the communist parties, etc. So yeah, here it's like, as per the article, the phenomenal rise in industrial disputes arose because of the questions of personnel. So, uh, again, because again, this should be read in the backdrop of a deteriorating law and order and migrations, how issues of personnel became rather important in this context. So,
What is the issues of personnel? I know you're giving your interpretation of what's happening with labor laws and whatnot, but I'm finding that up till now, if labor laws are not strong, why is there a sudden rise in industrial disputes? Obviously, it seems related to the chaos and violence of the transfer of power, but what's actually going on?
the article seems a bit vague on what it actually means by personas because probably it's quoting some report or some findings, but perhaps it can be because of the transfer of population and because if whenever there is a general breakdown of law and order as systems go into a state of chaos if we can matlab, read it
Right.
like
Yeah.
that. I mean, I'm not very sure exactly what it might mean, but if we can, like, perhaps.
Okay. Thank you. That's very interesting aspect to look at.
Um, yeah, next slide, please. Yeah, so on 28 July, so here's a statement from Gandhi. Rulers should first become servants of people. Mahatma's call to states in power speech. No more shelter of British guns. Gandhiji urges prince to act on the advice of Prajamandals. Prajamandals mean here the public, general public, their subjects. So again, yeah, I think the headline itself is self-evident here.
Yeah, so also I wanted to mention here the term first servants. I don't think it's you could take it as meaning become servants first, but there's the first lady is always, the wife of the president and so on. So, or prime minister in the case of India and UK. A first servant would be that they become the primary servant. That's their primary job, is to be a servant of the people in that context.
Yeah. So, and also if we see a smaller, blurb underneath, police fire on crowd trying to break ban on conference. Over 10,000 seats held meeting in spite of restrictions. Uh, so in the earlier slide, I mentioned how there were a lot of protests and demonstrations organized by different groups and organizations who were looking for, who were protesting against partition or were seeking a much more systematic withdrawal of or transfer of power. So this is one such instance where, as we see, in spite of curfew and everything, the organization met and they're fired upon by the police. Above, there's like 88,000 French casualties in Indochina in 6 months. So Ram Reconquest program destroyed, Vietnamese claims. So again, it's like uh, not only the British Empire was collapsing, other
Colonial
colonial
entities. Mhm.
empires were collapsing as well. So one of the most important empires which collapsed was the French occupation of Vietnam. So post Second World War, the Vietnams, led by the Communist Party of Vietnam under the leadership of Ho Chi Minh, rose up against, declared independence from the French, and led a prolonged struggle which would eventually lead to Vietnamese independence. So, again, almost, I think in 48 or 49, I might be incorrect with the exact date. Apologies for that. But
Yeah,
yeah,
that's very interesting.
so again, we see a report from international happening. So it's very interesting how parallelly these processes, similar but different processes, are replicated in different parts of Asia. So, yeah. Next slide, please. Okay, so the picture here is not very clear. So if I may read, the top headline reads, India to move UNO on Indonesian issue. Then so again, it's a continuation of what is happening. So, and in a later slide, we'll see that India, along with Australia, moved the UNO actually on this issue. And
What was the issue that India is moving the UN on?
because of the Dutch, or the Dutch trying to reoccupy Indonesia, the same. It's like on the Indonesian struggle and the Dutch excesses that had been committed. So the what unrestrained Dutch violence over Indonesia. So then on the article below, it discusses the nature of executives. So, uh, yeah, India, India plans executive on British models. So, as we know that India follows a parliamentary system of government where the prime minister is the head of the government and the president is the head of the state. Now, the president in India has more or less similar functions come as the British monarch, and the prime minister is again responsible to the executive, to the legislature, and has to enjoy the support and has a council of ministers appointed by the president, uh, who who belong to the ruling party or coalition, and they need to be re-elected or member of the legislature as
What
well.
is this
So
article? What is this article about, though?
this article is about this only, that India plans to model its executive on the British model.
Okay.
So
Okay. So that's what it's talking about. Okay. Got it.
yeah,
Got it.
so yeah, I yeah, okay, next slide please. Okay, so World Labor condemned Dutch aggression in Indonesia. Immediate end of hostilities demanded. So again, it's a continuation of what we have been seeing. Indian volunteers force for Indonesia. So as we see that the Indian government also had the Indian national movement, right? The nationalist leaders also had sympathies for the Indonesian national movement as well. So uh, yeah, so this entire article, this entire huge piece of article is on whatever happenings in Indonesia, which again was reported daily by the newspaper, which I found quite interesting. On the left-hand side, we see article on attack on Travancore Diwana hoax. So this is very interesting because like the Travancore was one of the states which took some time in deciding whether it wanted to join the Indian Union or remain independent. And so there was so on 25th July, there was a attempt made on the life of the Diwan of Travancore while he was attending I think he had gone to a musical school to attend a performance or something. So this attack, this newspaper claims to be a hoax because, again, this should be read in the light of the leanings of the way the newspaper leaned, because the Travancore Diwan was not outrightly keen to join the Indian Union at first, but actually, this attack on the Travancore Diwan was crucial in hastening the processes of Travancore joining India.
Mm,
So again, that way it's a bit interesting because, and this
interesting.
article quotes a Hindustan Times correspondent quotes another newspaper calling the attack a hoax, like simply to gain sympathies of.
Yeah. Very interesting.
Although we don't know if it was a hoax or not. So yeah, so here it's direct action by Hindu Sabha. Mahant Digvijayanath explains reasons. So again, the direct action by the Hindu Sabha. So this particular article discusses the threat of a direct action on the lines of the ones what declared by the Muslim League a year ago on you know direct action against
And what does
if
direct action mean, according
so
to this
direct
article?
action means that basically it would mean that law would be taken into hands. There would be a series of demonstrations and protests, meetings, etc. if their demands are not met, like it happened in the case of the direct action day on in 1946.
Okay.
Uh, so though the
I
article
mean, I just want to stick to like what's in the actual newspaper, what it's actually printed there instead of our
yeah so
interpretation. So I was just
yeah
wondering
so
what it actually says here in the newspaper.
So basically, what the Hindu Sabha is saying that if their demands are not fulfilled, they would resort to, taking up law and order in their own hands, organize what they call peaceful demonstrations and meetings, etc., in protest against the government. So yeah, as
Okay.
so yeah. Next slide, please. I think that would be the last few. Okay. So no need of passports from one dominion into another. Domicile committee recommendation, common currency up to March 30. So I think this is again like as part of the bilateral discussions taking place between the leaders of the Indian Union and Pakistan. So it was decided that few things till and such time rules are framed or to say give respite to the citizens, passports won't be required from crossing into uh, one dominion to another, perhaps because of the fluid situations at the border at this time. Similarly, common currency would be in use because that would again render a lot of existing currency to be useless, which would be only adding fuel to the fire to what was happening. So would aggravate the crisis. In the right-hand corner, we see no improvement in Calcutta situation. 8 killed and 48 injured on Tuesday. Attempt to rob bank. So what was very interesting is that 2 weeks ago, when I was presenting, uh, the situation in Kolkata was also bad, but the newspaper would, give it much more space, in terms of a bigger space for the entire report. But now, as I went through all these days of reports, these 7 days, I saw that they had been restricted to a small box, like how violence had become routine and almost endemic in Kolkata, and so much so that the newspaper didn't even bother to give it special focus, given the magnitude of violence that actually was taking place. So, yeah. The next on the right hand side, we have first Indian to be no previous slide, please. First Indian to be appointed Commissioner of Police of Calcutta. So again, it's self-evident that a new commissioner for the police of Calcutta was appointed, and yeah, he was the first Indian to be appointed to that post. Next slide, please. Yeah. So as I mentioned previously, India and Australia referred the Indonesian issue to the UNO. Then Britain suspends all military supplies to the Dutch in the Far East. International move to check aggression. Pakistan pledges full support to Nehru government action. Again, I think it's self-explanatory. Now, this small article blurb below the photo talks about Gandhiji's view on Pakistan, that advice to the Indian Union Muslims that they shouldn't look to Pakistan for safety. So yeah, again, Gandhiji appeals. Though
Interesting.
Gandhiji was throughout opposed to partition, according in his memoirs and in his writings, he had said that he had to accept it finally. So, uh, and but after the partition, he became a what? He became a staunch supporter of proper division of resources and everything, because such conflicts arose between India and Pakistan over division of personnel or resources and everything. So yeah, again, uh, yeah, I guess that's it on
Okay,
my.
well, thank you so much. That was very, very helpful and very informative. If you had to summarize this particular week 75 years ago, how would you summarize it?
So again, it's like we see that the negotiations between the Indian state and the British government on one hand, and also like between the Indian state, Indian Union, and the Pakistan leaders also continued further. While at the same time there was a deterioration of law and order, the law and order situation continued to be fluid and everything. But at the same time, the newspaper also seemed to focus every day on the happenings outside. And it's very interesting how not only in India was not an isolated, you know, island where there was a crumbling of the colonial edifice that was taking place, but similar processes were also seen across different parts of the world.
It's very fascinating.
So that's very fascinating, and one can notice the differences that existed between India and say different parts like Indonesia, where there was a prolonged violent struggle at this point between the Dutch forces and the Indonesian people. While in India, it was more of the more of a negotiation, like more negotiation, bargaining taking place between the two, colonize and the colonized. So, yeah.
It's interesting also to note that the original East India Company was Dutch, and it was in Indonesia. That's where the word India comes from, actually. for the original East India Company. It was because of the Indonesian connected, it being
The East India Company was the last one to be founded, actually.
The British East India Company
Yes,
came after
sorry.
the Dutch East India Company.
Yes.
So, okay, well, thank you so much. It was wonderful. That was very, very enlightening. And to all our audience, please join us again on Monday. We are hosting 75 Days of Partition between June 3rd, the day that the Mountbatten Partition Plan was announced, and August 17th, when the Radcliffe Line was publicly announced. And that's actually, it turns out to be 75 days in between, and it's a coincidence that it's also the 75th anniversary of partition, and we are commemorating that with this event series. Thank you, Debanjan, and we look forward to seeing everyone again on Monday.